After World War II, Argentina was run by Juan Perón, and it was quite a hard time. Back then, the government decided to get rich by the fur industry, built on beaver pelts. The problem was that there were no beavers in South America, so they had to bring them in from somewhere. Back then, the Argentine government contacted the Canadian company Hudson's Bay to order animals from them, and it fell to the Canadian pioneer pilot Tom Lamb to handle this. He caught 20 beavers in the Manitoba shrubs, built special enclosures for the animals from barrels, and sent them by train to Winnipeg, where he loaded them onto a double-prop seaplane called Conso. During World War II, these planes were used for long-range bombing and water landings, but Lamb converted the military plane into a cargo plane and took the beavers to their new home. Back then, the Argentine government paid Lamb $650 Canadian for each animal. Today, that'd be around 11,000 Canadian dollars for a beaver, or nearly 8,000 US dollars. Probably not that much money considering how far Lamb had to fly, since the straight distance is 7,580 miles. Besides, to refuel, Lamb had to take a roundabout route through New York, Miami, Brazil, and Uruguay. For example, in Miami, the pilot even rented a separate room to keep the animals while he was taking a break. It's just that the beavers chewed through the wooden door, causing a bit of a panic. The animals were running around the office, the girls climbed up on the tables, and it took some effort to catch all the beavers and get them back in place. But in the end, the flight went on, and Lamb, along with the beavers, arrived in Ushuaia, which at the time claimed to be the southernmost city in the world. There, the pilot found a suitable spot and set the beavers free. So in 1946, beavers were brought into Patagonia with the full approval of the authorities. Pretty quickly, the animals spread across most of Tierra del Fuego and were even spotted on the Brunswick Peninsula on the mainland side of Chile. Only thing is, they never brought any benefits to the region. The fur trade didn't take off and the beavers became a problem, so both governments, Argentina and Chile, agreed to team up to wipe them out. But as is often the case with new species, rolling things back turned out to be not so easy. We'll continue after a cup of coffee. A super unobtrusive reminder to do a little something under the video. To start off, like always, it makes sense to say a few words about the place the beavers found themselves in. Tierra del Fuego is a big archipelago that spans parts of Chile and Argentina. It's perched on the southern tip of South America, and nowadays there are more beavers than people. And you can really tell. Ever since the beavers showed up, the Magellanic forests of Patagonia have never been the same. Where there used to be thick forests, there are now mangled trunks, naked branches, and knobby stumps. Basically, everything that could be cut down was cut down. Instead of a pristine, one-of-a-kind ecosystem, there are now sunken trees and stripped logs dried out by icy winds. And there's no one to blame for this except the beavers, because they've got, well, a very distinctive style. If you see tooth marks around a tree trunk that's been shaped into a pencil tip, you can be sure it was a beaver, even if there's not a single one in sight. And beavers work fast. One animal is enough to bring down a tree in just a few days, a tree that took centuries to grow. But beavers don't just chop down trees, they build dams, and because of that, 90% of the rivers and streams on the Chilean side of Tierra del Fuego have changed course. That's had a huge impact on the local ecosystems. Even though beavers are usually seen as friends of the environment, what they do in Tierra del Fuego is pure destruction. They leave behind barren wastelands with nothing but stumps. When it rains, the whole area gets washed away. Instead of a narrow river lined with trees, there's just a wide open pit where nothing can grow anymore. So dams built by beavers can cause floods and drown many acres of local vegetation, but even if the dam is destroyed, the built-up mud buries the seeds that normally help the forest bounce back. Witnesses say the level of destruction is like bulldozers tearing through the area. And these bulldozers don't stop for anything, wiping out even protected tree species and putting around 39 million acres of remaining native forests at risk. Scientists call the beavers' impact on the forest landscape of Tierra del Fuego the biggest landscape-level change in sub-Antarctic forests since the last ice age. Back then it was the glacier that changed the landscape, but now it's the beavers. Of course, this chaotic race on imaginary bulldozers has affected the local population as well. According to rough estimates, the beavers' activities cost Argentina $66 million a year. As I mentioned earlier, the beaver dams have changed river courses and have already caused large-scale flooding more than once. And they don't just flood what used to be forest, even cattle pastures are turning into ponds. Beavers also damage infrastructure by flooding highways and drainage pipes. They often chew through fences meant to keep sheep in enclosures, and the sheep take full advantage of this every time. And in 2017, beavers even damaged fiber optic cables in Tierra del Fuego, knocking out the internet and mobile service in the region's largest city. If that's not enough, even ski resorts have suffered. They lost bridges due to floods caused by beavers, but the most damage beavers cause, unexpectedly, is to drinking water, which gets polluted by numerous standing puddles and the byproducts of beaver activity. When it comes to the global scale, beavers also contribute to global warming since fallen trees and soil release carbon. On the other hand, almost everything on the planet today contributes to global warming. That's not the point. Scientists warn that the situation with beavers will only get worse. If nothing is done, the losses in Chile alone could reach $260 million over the next 20 years. Partly, the enormous scale of the beaver's impact is due to the fact that the local nature wasn't at all prepared for it. For example, North American trees evolved over millions of years to survive constant chewing by beavers. Willows, poplars, American beech, and alders developed responses to beaver activity and flooding. They regrow when you cut them down, produce protective chemicals, and thrive in wet soil. The willow, a beaver's favorite snack, grows a few shoots when it's chewed on, like the hydra that grows heads back. Poplars produce unpleasant tannins that discourage beavers from gnawing on them. But in South America, trees aren't used to this treatment. In the forests of Patagonia, beech trees dominate, and they've never developed strategies to coexist with beavers. They don't recover after being cut down. They don't produce nasty chemicals, and they just die if it gets too wet. The Magellanic forest recovers from soil seed banks, so when the area gets flooded, the seeds can't sprout. They can only rot. But the worst part is that the problem is spreading. Beavers were introduced to Argentina in 1946, and by the 1960s, they'd already moved to the Chilean side of Tierra del Fuego. The border didn't stop them at all, since in reality, the beavers were gnawing on the fence. Essentially, it was just wire, so the animals probably even noticed it. Then, by the early 1990s, locals began spotting beavers on the Brunswick Peninsula in mainland Chile. This meant that creatures were bravely crossing the unpredictable currents of the Strait of Magellan. However, a recent study shows that beavers from Tierra del Fuego made their way to the continent back in 1968. That is 26 years before they were first spotted. To figure this out, researchers reconstructed the date when trees from various places in the continental region of southern Chile were attacked by the rodents. The team worked by counting the annual rings in fallen trunks. This method is called dendrochronology and is widely used by historians, but it was applied for the first time to date the presence of invasive species. At the same time, the researchers found out that there may be even more beavers in South America than people had thought. So far, we know that beavers have colonized at least 27,000 square miles of territory and destroyed almost 120 square miles of peat bogs, forests, and meadows. That's an area nearly twice the size of Washington, D.C. But the worst part is that even without trees, beavers are still fine against everything we thought we knew about them. At first, environmentalists, stunned by the loss of Patagonia's forests, hoped that the beaver invasion would be stopped by natural barriers. Patagonia has two main habitats, forest and steppe, with the latter being a windy, dry, grassy area where the lack of trees seemed to limit the beavers. However, in 2017, an Argentine biologist named Alejandro Pietrek discovered that, contrary to expectations, beavers actually produce more offspring in the steppe. Not bothered by the lack of trees, they happily build their dams out of shrubs. As long as there's water, the rest doesn't bother the beavers. Naturally, such aggressive behavior triggers a cascade effect throughout the ecosystem, wrecking the habitat and paving the way for invasion of other exotic plants and animals. For instance, ponds made by beavers draw muskrats, another invasive species in Patagonia. In turn, muskrats are preyed on by mink, animals that also happily hunt local geese, ducks, and small rodents. Researchers have even suggested that Patagonia is going through an invasive meltdown process where the harm caused by one invasive species is made worse by another. By the way, the muskrat and the mink are two other mammals with luxurious fur which were introduced to Tierra del Fuego in the 1940s by the government, though it was the Chilean one by then. On their own, these animals might have died out, but beavers were brought in just in time to ensure their survival. When researchers searched one of the captured islands, they discovered an incredible 97% of the tracks, droppings, and burrows of muskrats around the beaver ponds and wetlands. In other words, one rodent successfully supported the other. The same thing happened with the mink. But you know what's ironic? In Argentina, they seriously wondered whether the beavers would survive when they were first brought from Canada. The experiment seemed really risky, since beavers are monogamous. If one of the animals dies, the partner probably won't be able to reproduce. But all this worry turned out to be unnecessary. According to an NPR report from June 2011, there were 200,000 beavers in Patagonia. Another report says that the number exceeds 100,000. And just to remind you, only 20 individuals were brought here in 1946. So even by the most modest estimates, the beaver population in this area has increased more than 5,000 times. And there might be even more beavers than have been counted. Since it could take locals years or even decades to notice the presence of the rodents, it's quite likely that both on the mainland and on the islands we know nothing about, there could be stable beaver populations. Moreover, there's practically no one to keep them in check. North American beavers don't have many natural predators in this area. In their native range in North America, bears and wolves control their population, but neither of those were brought to Tierra del Fuego along with the beavers, so there are no predators, and the conditions are just perfect. On Tierra del Fuego, most of the land is near watercourses and covered in forests with trees and other plants that provide food and shelter. In a way, it's a real beaver paradise. And even the people for whom all this was basically started didn't end up being predators for the beavers. The governments of Argentina and Chile began to realize the scale of their problem in the 1990s, so they started encouraging amateur and commercial hunting. But the hunting attempts were, to put it mildly, lackluster. There were too few interested hunters to really impact the populations, and beaver pelts never became valuable on the local markets. The fur trade never took off, so without any financial incentive, hunters had to kill just for fun. But we're talking about beavers here, not some bloodthirsty predators or nasty amphibians, but cute, a little silly, and totally peaceful creatures. Herbivores who just build dams. It's really hard to see such animals as terrifying invaders. The locals who still hunted beavers did it only during their free time, mostly near the roads, instead of going deep into the wilderness where the beavers caused the most damage. Basically, you can understand them. Who would want to go into a cold, windswept forest looking for animals when you don't even get paid for it? And by cold, I mean a subpolar oceanic climate. Antarctica's not far at all, and the temperature stays pretty much the same all year round. In Ushuaia, it barely gets above 48 degrees Fahrenheit in summer and averages around 32 degrees in winter. With weather like that, it can even snow in summer, and some southern areas have a sub-Antarctic climate typical of the tundra, sometimes even polar. And now imagine being told to head out in this kind of weather deep into the island where there are no roads, but the ground is soaked from floods. And you have to go quite a distance just to shoot some adorable beavers and in return get pretty much nothing. A 1998 article in the Argentine newspaper La Nación mentioned a reward of $20 at most. No wonder that wasn't much of a motivator. But lately, both countries, Chile and Argentina, have gotten more serious about wiping out the beavers. Back in 2006, the province of Tierra del Fuego issued a declaration calling beavers a harmful and destructive species. 2 years later, Chile and Argentina signed a bilateral agreement to work together on exterminating the rodents, or as they called the plan, restoring the southern ecosystems damaged by the invasion of North American beavers. As if they weren't the ones who brought the beavers there in the first place? Oh well, those are just details. In 2011, government officials announced plans to bring in professional trappers who would use dogs, helicopters, and boats to move around the area. And in 2016, the countries kicked off a series of pilot projects to figure out the best way to wipe out the beavers. That same year, in 2016, Argentina announced a plan to shoot 100,000 animals, one of the biggest invasive species control projects ever undertaken. Remember that plan, we'll come back to it a bit later. Naturally, the authorities consulted experts, and they estimated it might take 10 to 15 years to wipe out all the beavers. The thing is, it's not exactly clear how fast the culling needs to go to keep the beavers from reproducing. But what we do know is that in 2017, the Chilean government rolled out a $7.8 million population control project, with $2.1 million of that coming from the Global Environment Facility. Some of the funds went into installing traps, said to be a fast and humane method of killing. They looked a bit like bear traps, just on a smaller scale. But the real pros were sent to fight the beavers. Equipped with helicopters, cold weather gear, and survival training for long stints in hostile territory, they set themselves a 10-year mission: catch and wipe out 100,000 Canadian beavers. It was estimated that there were 1 or 2 beaver colonies for every 0.6 miles of river. In the end, the pros managed to kill 1,000 animals over the year and clear 6 out of 7 target areas. Hunters said that in just 4 days they could completely rid the dam area of beavers. Usually there are about 8 beavers per dam, and they always use the same trails. That's where the hunters set their traps, and it worked. Yeah, I agree. Thinking about deliberately wiping out any animal like that feels a bit off, especially when the animal's that cute. But the beavers in that area are really destructive and are slowly wrecking pretty much everything they get to. And taking land back from beavers is no easy task. When the culling programs had just begun, researchers published some early results from their pilot project, which ran from October 2016 to January 2017. During this time, 10 trappers, called restorers in the report, set traps and snares around the designated area. Altogether, they trapped 197 beavers and shot 7 more. The outcome looked promising. The trappers thought they'd cleared the area of animals completely, but later a few beavers were spotted on motion sensor cameras. It's unclear whether the lost beavers were reinvaders coming in from outside the pilot area or if they had just slipped through the trappers' first attempts to catch them. But the results of this study confirmed that wiping them out is technically doable. It just won't be easy. Also, beavers aren't nearly as dumb as they might seem. Also, a beaver can lose a limb that gets caught in a trap to avoid being caught, and stuff like that. It's a shame you can't ask them not to ruin the ecosystems. It's also a shame that some experts doubt if full eradication is even possible. As I've said before, Tierra del Fuego is an archipelago made up of hundreds of small, hard-to-reach islands. If the beavers survive on at least one of them, they could repopulate all the others and even make their way back to the mainland. On top of that, eradication depends a lot on the political situation. In Argentina, where high inflation has driven 1/3 of the population into poverty, it might be especially difficult to convince people to care about some forests down south. It's hard to think about the environment when you literally have nothing to eat. Moreover, any campaign aimed at fighting beavers and restoring forests should be carried out jointly by Argentina and Chile. If one of the countries doesn't take part, the efforts of the other will be completely useless. Although the large-scale trapping program in the pilot phase was supposed to help contain the spread, scientists say that beavers will stay in South America. On many islands, the forests are just too dense and there are no roads, so hunters can't really count on success. But can beavers keep expanding northward? The latest data seems to confirm this possibility. In a model that takes into account the climate conditions favorable to the species spread, scientists predict that beavers could colonize South America up to at least 43 degrees south latitude. That's about 807 miles north of their last confirmed location. According to the forecast, the expansion will mainly occur to the west of the Andes on the Chilean side, and according to this same forecast, no eradication efforts will help here. Scientists thought so back in 2015, and it seems they were right. People still haven't managed to stop the beaver invasion. At least I haven't found any data on this. But if you have any info, feel free to share it in the comments. You owe me a like. See you later.